Good evening, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved brother, as always, Ranga. So we are still in the pure existent, and page was 83. The line begins, "But all this, it may be said, is valid only so long as we accept," etc.
Should we read the para again, or we have read it once, so we'll go sentence by sentence. But all this, it may be said, is valid only so long as we accept the concepts of pure reason and remain subject to them. He's saying that when we are in the mental field, to any concept that you can conceive of, the mind is capable of thinking of the opposite. At the mental level, this is very, very possible. At the animal level, this doesn't exist. This is a property of the mind, that any concept that you have, you can think of the opposite. So, the question arises that the pure reason is saying that if there is movement, there has to be a non-movement. That's what he's saying. So then in actual experience, you see that this non-movement is also there, so there is a dichotomy between the two. So that's what he's mentioning. And somebody may argue and say, on behalf of the Mayavadin, that all this argument is valid only at this level. He may say that I am experiencing the total nihil. So how can you say that it is real? That's the argument that is being given. But the concepts of reason have no obligatory force. The argument continues. We must judge of existence not by what we mentally conceive, but by what we see to exist. And the purest, freest form of insight into existence as it is shows us nothing but movement. If we see the physical world, no mental conception, all that, I see only what I see, I will believe in. It is only the movement that you see in the physical world. There is nothing else, no stability anywhere at all. So, and the purest, freest form of insight into existence as it is shows us nothing but movement. Two things alone exist: movement in space, movement in time. The former objective, the latter subjective. Extension is real, duration is real, space and time are real. This is what the normal man would argue. Even if you can go behind extension in space and perceive it as a psychological phenomenon, as an attempt of the mind to make existence manageable by distributing the indivisible whole in a conceptual space, yet we cannot go behind the movement of succession and change in time. For that is the very stuff of our consciousness. We are, and the world is a movement that continually progresses and increases by the inclusion of all the successions of the past in a present which represents itself to us as the beginning of all the successions of the future. A beginning, a present that always eludes us because it is not, for it has perished before it is born. There is the strange dilemma of the present. Before you can even say present, is gone. So the present is almost, you can say, a non-existent thing. The past is real to us, the future we don't know, and the present is an ever-fleeting moment. So, for that is the very stuff of our consciousness. We are, and the world is a movement that continually progresses and increases by the inclusion of all the successions of the past in a present which represents itself to us as the beginning of all the successions of the future. A beginning, a present that always eludes us because it is not, for it has perished before it is born. What is the eternal. Srivamda often uses this, what exists, in the sense of what exists is the eternal, indivisible succession of time, carrying on its stream a progressive movement of consciousness, also indivisible. Duration then, eternally successive movement and change in time, is the sole absolute. Becoming is the only being. Someone who is fixed in the earth will have this position, that I can see only change and becoming as contrasted to being. Being is static, becoming is a constant movement.
So
There's
when
There's
we-
a footnote,
we-
yeah.
Yeah.
Indivisible. Indivisible in the totality of the movement. Because you can think of moments which are broken up. Indivisible in the totality of the movement. Each moment of time or consciousness may be considered as separate from its predecessor and successor. Each successive action of energy as a new quantum or new creation. But this does not abrogate continuity, without which there would be no duration of time or coherence of consciousness. A man's steps as he walks or runs or leaps are separate, but there is something that takes the steps and makes the movement continuous. We discussed this yesterday
Yes.
and the other day,
Yes.
that actually the scientific problem is the same. Is this energy and is this movement a staccato movement? Is it coming in bits and pieces, or is it a continuous wave? Is it like a wave, or is it like particles? In science we have the same problem. They could not solve the problem, so they say wavicle. It's wave as well as particle. But we discussed it the other day, na? The clock.
And the motion picture too.
Yeah, and the motion picture. So you can see that which seems to be continuous in a motion picture is only a series of static images. So then you feel the continuity. Every second of action is actually 24 frames broken up into static images. And still you feel that it is the same. So the clock also, if you reduce that every 5 seconds, the clock is stopping. Movement, static. Movement, status. Movement, status. Reduce that to 5 seconds to 2 seconds, 1 second, 0.001 second, then you get a continuous. But the break is always there, and yet you feel a continuous movement. So the two are the same. That's what it is.
Ranga, the old joke, the only two things we can be sure of are change and taxes. Right? So where does change occur here?
In the physical world, that's exactly what he is talking about.
Exactly.
That this constant change is there.
At every frame there is
Yeah,
change.
there is
Yes.
And yet we feel that it is continuous. That's the two are actually the same. The change and continuity and movement. In reality, this opposition of actual insight into being to the conceptual fictions of the pure reason is fallacious. We are making a contrast between that which is static and that which is movement. So he says it is a fallacious movement. It's not the reality. If indeed intuition in this matter were really opposed to intelligence, we could not confidently support a merely conceptual reasoning against fundamental insight. But this appeal to intuitive experience is incomplete. It is valid only so far as it proceeds and it errs by stopping short of the integral experience. So long as the intuition fixes itself only upon that which we become, we see ourselves as a continual progression of movement and change in consciousness in the eternal succession of time. We are the river, the flame of the Buddhist illustration. But there is a supreme experience and supreme intuition by which we go back behind our surface self and find that this becoming, change, succession are only a mode of our being, and that there is that in us which is not involved at all in the becoming. Not only can we have the intuition of this that is stable and eternal in us, not only can we have the glimpse of it in experience behind the veil of continually fleeting becomings, but we can draw back into it and live in it entirely, so effecting an entire change in our external life and in our attitude and in our action upon the movement of the world. So, a psychological condition will completely change the reality of the physical world, and your behavior also will change. That's what I say. We'll come back to it. And this stability in which we can so live is precisely that which the pure reason has already given us. Although it can be arrived at without reasoning at all, without knowing previously what it is. It is pure existence, eternal, infinite, indefinable, not affected by the succession of time, not involved in the extension of space, beyond form, quantity, quality, self only, and absolute. What he is saying, we'll go sentence by sentence. In reality, this opposition of actual insight into being and the conceptual fictions of the pure reason is fallacious. I am seeing movement here and I am not seeing the stability anywhere, but it's a concept, a mental concept that there can be a stability. Intuition is telling you that there is a stability when we have the spiritual experience, but the world seems to be disappearing. So there is a contrast between the two. So if indeed intuition in this matter were really opposed to intelligence, we could not confidently support a merely conceptual reasoning against fundamental insight. So, if there is a opposition between the mental concepts and experience, then we would have to say that they are two different things altogether. But there is a correspondence between them. That's what he is pointing out. And where does this harmony between the two take place? He's saying you have to go to a supreme. He'll tell that later on. We'll come to that. But this appeal to intuitive experience is incomplete. Sri Aurobido's whole contention is that now there is the physical world of movement. There is the second layer of absolute stability, which is the self and the Brahmic consciousness. The two seem to be opposed to each other. Here we have movement, there we have a static condition. Is the divine really divided into two things? There are philosophies which correspond to that. The Sankhya philosophy, they say yes, there is Purusha and Prakriti. The duality in the physical world is real. They stop at that. It's a dual philosophy. The Sri Aurobido's philosophy tallies with the Advaita philosophy. You go to the third level, you see that there are only different ways of looking at the reality. There are no oppositions at all. And the third level, supreme level, is the supermind. You go there, you see that they are all perfectly consistent with each other. Just now we saw that stability and movement are really the same. There is no difference. That's what you see when you go to the supreme level. That's why he's saying that the experience of the self, the Brahmic consciousness, is incomplete. In the normal yogic process in India, you get liberation, you go to the self and you are very, very happy, you are at peace and you feel that that's the end of the journey. Sri Aurobindo is challenging that. No, there is something else. If you stop only at the self, this contradiction is there between static and dynamic. There is a difference. In fact, he had this problem even himself, even up to the overmind level, he had this problem. But he is not accepting that the dualistic philosophy is final. He thinks there must be a oneness in things, there must be a unity. I can't think that division is the ultimate reality. It has to be a fundamental unity. Where can I find that? So he was still skeptical even at the overmind level. Finally he finds it in the supermind. And I was just reading the other day what Anmol pointed out to me yesterday, that the Purushottama consciousness is not the supramental consciousness. The supramental consciousness is the power of the Purushottama. Sri Aurobido's Ishvara consciousness and Purushottama of the Gita are really the same. Then, if you go even up to the overmind level of consciousness, you can have that consciousness in the physical world, but it is not enough to transform you. Only the supramental power, when you reach and you can bring it down here, that has the power to completely harmonize all your thing and even bring transformation. The overmind consciousness cannot transform you at the lower level. It's only the supramental consciousness that can transform you. So that's what he's talking about. But there is a supreme experience, and that supreme intuition by which we go back behind our surface self and find that this becoming, change, succession are only a mode of our being, and that there is that in us which is not involved at all in the becoming. So, even when you go to the self, you are in a consciousness which is absolutely static, and you are looking at all the movement in the physical body. You are looking at your own body-mind life also going on moving, but you are not part of it. The body-mind life is going on mechanically, doing whatever it needs to do. Nature is animating body-mind life. You are pure consciousness looking at your own body-mind life, and all the old habits that you see, you are amused at them. When you are identified with your body, mind, life, you feel that my anger is a problem, my jealousy is a problem. But when you are here, they are not a problem at all. You are just looking at them and seeing exactly what it is. And you feel it, a childish tantrums. That's what he uses in one sentence. He says, these are all childish tantrums. You have separated yourself and you are free. There is a beautiful sonnet by Sri Aurobindo called The Self. If you have seen that, there he says, it goes like, Sri Aurobindo is having a little bit of fun in that sonnet. He says, the Advaitin, he is liberated himself when he says, I am free. And then he starts swearing when his dinner is not ready. And Sri Aurobindo says, how come you are swearing when you... He says, I am not swearing, it's the stomach that is growling. So although he is having fun, it's really an experience which you feel that these things are not mine. We come back to that again concept of the, where you are in the experience of the self, the Brahmic consciousness, three possibilities. Mostly it is that you see the physical world as unreal and you reject it. Body, mind, life this is not my body, mind, life. They were only instruments given to me for experience in the world. I reject it. But Sri Aurobindo says you can be in the cosmic consciousness and you don't reject the physical world, you embrace it. You actually embrace the physical world. Then the world is real to you. But Sri Aurobindo had the experience of the rejection, but he didn't reject. He says, I'll wait. I can't take this, that the ultimate reality is twofold. It can't be twofold. It has to be a single reality. So he keeps waiting until he sees that this emptiness starts filling up with divine love, divine power, divine knowledge, all this starts pouring into him. So he is always very, very sure that neither the spiritual solution is complete nor the material solution is complete. You have to go to the supramental level, transform body, mind, life here. Life is a meaning and it's not an empty thing. The divine is expressing himself here and revealing all his powers one by one. There's an evolution and you can also become free and participate in God's work here in the physical world. That's his whole idea.
And we have to be patient also.
Yes, we have to be very patient because it's a very long, long work. So this last thing that is mentioning that. And in the synthesis is very clear that when there is something in us, when you enter into the self, you separate yourself and you are absolutely in a motionless, immutable condition. And you are at absolute peace and even your own defects in the body, mind, life, you are just watching them without being disturbed at all. But the ascetic, he is very satisfied with that condition and goes into the infinite, merges into the infinite and is very satisfied. What is my body, mind, life after all? It's just, it may live for maximum 100 years, maybe 101, 102, but after that it will go away. That's not me. I am pure consciousness and I have joined myself to the Supreme. So the idea in that destiny of the individual, we read that the destiny of the individual is not to disappear into the infinite. He can if he wants, but there is a better destiny. Get that divine power and divine knowledge, come down into the physical world, become an instrument of God. That's his whole idea. Throughout Life Divine, this is the main thing that he is exposing. And to be able to do that, he has to establish the connection between the higher and the lower, and he is doing that in Life Divine.
I read today Satprem's talk to Mother about this gentleman. Maybe you could shed some more light on him.
What was it?
Who has the harmony and is able to heal people by thought. You remember reading that?
No, I don't remember.
It's a powerful thing, very powerful. Has anyone read it?
Maybe you can bring the text next time.
I have the text with me.
Right now?
Yes.
Oh, then why don't you read it?
But it's long.
Doesn't matter. Because the more we explore the side issues, the more clear it becomes.
I wrote a note. I have chosen this long selection of Satprem and the Mother about a man who had extraordinary powers and wanted to meet Mother. I believe it is very important for all to hear. Mother begins, so did you see this healer? Satprem, yes, I saw him. Mother, tell me. Satprem, I am very much struck, I must say. First of all, to put things physically, the first time I saw him, I remained with him for 3.5 hours. He didn't stop talking. Mother, oh. But the extraordinary thing is that usually when I am with people, after half an hour, I am exhausted. After 3.5 hours, I didn't budge, didn't stop looking at him, I was fresh as a daisy and so full of energy that I didn't sleep the whole night. And I spent 3.5 hours listening to this man. So then Mother says, oh, but he's first rate. Satprem, I was quite fresh, as I am not after resting. But I'd like to mention one thing. I saw him before he came to Pondicherry. The day he reached Bombay, I had a sort of vision I didn't understand. I saw an enormous white horse, huge but massive, like an enormous plow horse, not beautiful, but with an awesome, massive power, a huge white horse. And when I saw him here, I thought, but here's my white horse. Mother says, yes, surely. Satprem, a plow animal, not beautiful, but awesome. Mother, and what does he say? Satprem, he's come here with a question, not a mental one. But I should perhaps tell you the stages of his discovery. As you know, he discovered experimentally on himself what was going on. So he sought to understand. He bought books, went to so-called healers. The first people who taught him were spiritualists. They told him, use a pendulum. He used a pendulum to detect diseases, and it worked very well. Then after a time he thought, but this isn't reality. And then his pendulum stopped working. Afterwards he went to see someone who told him, but you should do magnetic passes. He was taught how to do it, and it worked very well. With his fingers he could feel the organs that were out of harmony, because for him the key word is harmony or disharmony. Then after a while he said to himself, but this isn't reality either, and nothing worked anymore. Mother, oh, it's very interesting. Satprem, he thought, but I have nothing left, neither a pendulum, nor my hands, nor anything. And all of a sudden he had a revelation. You have nothing left because you no longer need anything. Then he noticed that when his thought met with someone's thought or call, it was done in a split second. For instance, one day a woman sent him a wire in Paris. She had given birth and had a torn perineum. He got the wire, thought, and said, she's cured. The next morning he went and saw her. The perineum had healed. Another extraordinary case, a woman was dying in the 5th month of her pregnancy, dying of meningeal tuberculosis. The hospital was helpless. They brought her home. In reality, she didn't want her child. He went and saw her several times, and one day she had terrible convulsions and died in his arms. Then he says, I had a sort of prayer at the bottom of my heart. I said, but this woman hasn't followed the law of love. It's right that she should die, but why should this child in her die? He had a sort of prayer, and 5 minutes later, the woman came back to life in his arms. She opened her eyes and said, I am cured. She was indeed cured, but unable to move anymore. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to a child who was not only normal, but viable and full grown, which means that in those 15 days, the gestation had accelerated and the child was just as full grown as a 9-month-old child. Mother says, 5 months old. Yes, then the woman died the day after giving birth. And the child is now 17, I think. He told me, that's how it is. There is no power. It doesn't exist. There is that, the harmony. Everyone has the capacity to call this harmony, and it acts. And it acts in a second, instantly. But then he told me, here is my question, as far as I can express what he said. Basically, he is aware of quite an extraordinary power. Though I should say I didn't feel a shadow of ego in this man. There's no trace of ego. He read my book, but that didn't teach him things. It only confirmed some experiences. This man spoke to me for more than 3 hours, and apart from you and Sri Aurobindo, I have heard no one speak like him. It was a sage who spoke, a living experience that sprang forth. There wasn't one thing he said you wouldn't subscribe to. Those great forces of harmony that must be embodied on earth, brought down to earth. It was really a sage who spoke, and these were your words, Sri Aurobindo's words. Mother. That's what A told me the first day when he received him. He told me, I thought I was listening to you, or to Sri Aurobindo. Satprem. But the surprising thing, that when he spoke to me, it wasn't his mind that spoke. It was a living experience that sprang forth. That's what was extraordinary. He said, I have the experience of the transformation, the experience of cellular regeneration. I know from experience that there is intelligence, there is divinity deep down in the cells. I know all that, but it has to be embodied. Something has to be done. So here's his question. Mother says, what does he want to know? Satprem. He is conscious of this power, but he says one needs to have the total vision, the vision of total harmony, because he says it's all in equilibrium, a wonderful harmony, and we mustn't cause any disequilibrium. We must obey the law, follow the law of harmony. But it's a total law, of course, and we mustn't make any mistake. I need the total vision, he says. Take the ashram. It's a center of light where there is total harmony. Then there's a circle around it, Pondicherry, which is already darker. And Mother says, very dark. Satprem, and less receptive. So you can't bring the ashram's law into that obscurity without causing a disequilibrium. You can only bring part of it, or something that can be adapted to that darkness. Then there is a third, still darker circle, to which it's still harder to apply the law of total harmony. How to find out what one has to do depending on the particular point? How to know the right law, the total law? He says, I don't want to cause any disequilibrium. I want to obey the law. Then Mother asks when he's coming, and she says she'll see him. And Satprem, I told him Mother doesn't speak. He said, but of course, it's not words I need. Expressing is useless. What I want is the vibration, the experience. He understands silence very well. He understands quite well that evolution has reached a point where things must accelerate, and those forces of harmony must be brought into the world. But basically, he feels such a power in him that he wouldn't want to act arbitrarily. He wouldn't want to break the equilibrium, but to follow the law. And he says, the miracles that Christ worked, all that I can do. But if I did it with the means of communication of modern science, it would immediately be known the world over, and something of that sort could strike a great blow to the ordinary mind, which only believes in the truths of matter. He asks, that would be a means of action, but should I do that? His problem is one of action, and that's basically it.
Is there any record of Mother's?
I'm trying to find it, but I haven't found it yet. Because her meeting with him, that would be
really interesting
something.
Is this a part there's a gender.
Yes.
So what we have to read now is the pure existent is then.
Yes.
The pure existent is then a fact and no mere concept. It is the fundamental reality. But let us hasten to add, the movement, the energy, the becoming are also a fact, also a reality. The supreme intuition and its corresponding experience may correct the other, may go beyond, may suspend, but do not abolish it. We have therefore two fundamental facts of pure existence and of world existence, a fact of being, a fact of becoming. To deny one or the other is easy. To recognize the facts of consciousness and find out their relation is the true and fruitful wisdom, which is you find it in the supermind. Very simple, there is nothing to. Stability and movement, we must remember, are only our psychological representations of the Absolute, even as are oneness and multitude. The Absolute is beyond stability and movement, as it is beyond unity and multiplicity. But it takes its eternal poise in the one and the stable and whirls round itself infinitely, inconceivably, securely in the moving and multitudinous. World existence is the ecstatic dance of Shiva, which multiplies the body of the God numberlessly to the view. It leaves that white existence precisely where and what it was, ever is and ever will be. Its sole absolute object is the joy of the dancing.
Beautiful.
Oh, how beautiful.
Shiva's dance.
Even connected the colors, our Varna.
So, there is the movement, which is the physical world, there is the stability, which is the Brahmic consciousness, and there is the absolute, which is the supermind, which harmonizes all the three, all the two. Okay, then we go to the next one. But as we cannot describe or think out the absolute in itself, beyond stability and movement, beyond unity and multitude, nor is that at all our business, we must accept the double fact, admit both Shiva and Kali, and seek to know what is this measureless movement in time and space with regard to that timeless and spaceless pure existence, one and stable, to which measure and measurelessness are inapplicable. We have seen what pure reason, intuition and experience have to say about pure existence, about Sat. What have they to say about force, about movement, about Shakti? And the first thing we have to ask ourselves is whether that force is simply an unintelligent energy of movement, or whether the consciousness which seems to emerge out of it in this material world we live in is not merely one of its phenomenal results, but rather its own true and secret nature. In Vedantic terms, is force simply Prakriti, only a movement of action and process, or is Prakriti really power of Chit, in its nature, force of creative self-conscience? On this essential problem, all the rest hinges. There is the Vedantic solution, there is Chit, Shakti are always together. Wherever there is consciousness, there is also force. They are always together. Or if you want to put it in the other way, Purusha and Prakriti are always together, he says. Beautiful lines in Savitri where Purusha and Prakriti are all their action is the exchange of their eyes. They are looking at each other and exchanging. I've forgotten the exact.
The two who are one.
Yeah, the two who are one.
Or the might and right in
are
things.
The might and the right in things. So, at the highest level, Purusha seems to dominate. At the highest level, they are equal. At the first level, Prakriti is dominating Purusha. At the second level, Purusha is dominating Prakriti. At the highest level, they are equal to each other.
They There is this line also, for one too great for him, he worships her. That is
Yes,
the girl.
yes.
Very beautiful.
That is light and darkness are their eyes interchange.
Yeah, that's the line, na?
And light and darkness.
Light and darkness.
Yes.
Their eyes interchange. So, he has now come to the next one. He has discussed what is Sat. Now he wants to discuss Chit Shakti. And that's the next chapter. Conscious force. He will take force and then he will see whether there is consciousness in it. He will discuss all the possibilities and then he will go on to next to Ananda, delight of existence. And what is the problem and what is its solution.
I'll miss it.
Thank you, Ranga.